This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a quiet experiment, an experiment in whether the basic functions of government can be turned into leverage, whether the things you assume are guaranteed can be paused, redirected, or denied without changing the law. Only the conditions. For a moment, the country drifted toward a system where help was no longer automatic, where support was no longer neutral, where access depended on alignment. Most people never saw it happening because it didn't arrive as a crisis. It arrived as management. And if that sounds abstract, stay with me. Because the danger here is not what was attempted, it's what almost worked. If you want to understand how close this system came to changing permanently, you'll want to see the next few minutes. Because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. And the story doesn't stop where you think it does. For a long time, we were taught that power lived in elections, in personalities, in who won and who lost. But that's not what actually runs the system. What controls the system is distribution. Who decides when money moves? When permits stand, when rules apply evenly and when they don't. On paper, that authority is divided. Congress writes the checks. Agencies execute the law. Courts enforce the limits. But something shifted quietly. Execution began to look like discretion. Discretion began to look like judgment. And judgment began to look like loyalty tests. Funds already approved were treated as optional. Projects already permitted were treated as revocable. Programs already serving people were treated as leverage. Not because the law changed, but because enforcement did. That's the frame you have to hold. This is not about policy preferences. It's about whether neutral systems can be bent into conditional ones. And once that line blurs, the next step is never announced. It's normalized. And that's where the real movement began. There was a time when federal power moved slowly, deliberately, almost boringly, before, once Congress approved money, it moved not quickly, not efficiently, but predictably, before permits meant something. Grants meant something. Rules applied whether you were liked or not. And then the shift, not announced, not debated, just practiced. Funding began to pause. Projects began to stall. Programs began to wait, not because the law changed, because someone decided to reinterpret obedience as flexibility. What used to be automatic became conditional. What used to be statutory became discretionary. What used to be national became selective. And here's the dangerous part. It didn't feel like a seizure of power. It felt like management. Slow changes don't trigger alarms. They trigger adjustments. Agencies adjusted, states adjusted, markets adjusted. And each adjustment quietly rewrote expectations. Because the most destabilizing transformation isn't the one that breaks the system. It's the one that teaches the system to accept less. And once that acceptance sets in, the consequences don't arrive all at once. They arrive as shocks. The first one didn't look like the last. The first shock came in the form of money that already existed. Billions of dollars. Already approved. Already assigned. Already written into law. Money for clean energy projects. National in scope. Statutory in obligation. And then it stopped. Not everywhere. Not randomly. Selectively. States that had not aligned politically were told effectively that the funding pipeline could close, that what Congress had ordered distributed could be reconsidered, that geography, electoral geography, could determine access. When the admission came, it was almost casual. The distinction between red and blue states was said out loud, as if it were administrative logic. That was the shock. Because this wasn't a budget fight. Congress had already decided. This was the executive branch testing whether it could convert appropriations into incentives, rewards for loyalty, penalties for dissent. A federal court stepped in and called it illegal, forced it to stop. If you're watching closely, this is where you lean in. Because this wasn't the story. It was the probe. And once that boundary was tested in one sector, it didn't stay there. It spread To understand how this spreads, you have to understand the mechanism, because this wasn't chaos. It was process. The executive branch doesn't need to pass new laws to change outcomes. It only needs control over timing, over release, over approval. Money can be delayed. Permits can be reviewed. Grants can be reconsidered, all without announcing denial. On paper, everything still exists. In reality, nothing moves. That gap is where power concentrates. Those who comply move faster. Those who resist wait longer. Those who challenge get frozen. The benefits flow upward and inward. Political allies get certainty. Industries in favor get stability. The damage flows outward. States absorb the shortfalls. Cities stall projects. Families never see the service that was already promised. And because the harm is distributed, it feels abstract. No single victim, no single headline, just friction, delay, uncertainty. This is how systems enforce obedience without commands. Not by breaking the law outright, but by bending the experience of the law. And once that becomes normal, the next shock doesn't need permission. It just needs speed. The next shock came faster. No long pauses. No bureaucratic fog. Just action. An offshore wind project already underway, already permitted, already employing people. Ordered to stop. No new environmental finding. No safety emergency. Just a decision. Work halted. Contracts frozen. Timelines shattered. At the same time, funding for childcare and social services was threatened. Billions again. Programs already operating. Families already relying. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was pressure. Energy here. Children there. Different sectors. Same logic. If you step out of line, the machinery slows. If you comply, it moves. Courts moved quickly this time. They didn't deliberate for months. They blocked it. Illegal. Again. But notice the pattern. The system only stabilizes after disruption, after risk, after damage. Each intervention requires emergency braking, and emergency braking wears systems down because the question is no longer, can this be done? It's how many times can it be tried? And that question wasn't answered here. It was deferred. This is where it stops being abstract. This is where it reaches you. Because when funding pauses, you don't see a line item disappear. You feel a delay, a service that takes longer, a cost that creeps up. If you live in a state that wasn't aligned, projects slow, jobs stay unfilled, energy prices don't stabilize the way they were supposed to. If you rely on childcare assistance, the uncertainty hits first. Not a cancellation, a question mark. Can the center stay open? Can staff be paid next month? Can families plan? And when medical expertise is targeted, it's not ideology that suffers first. It's trust. Parents wondering which guidance still stands. Doctors wondering which institutions are safe to speak. This is how pressure actually works. Not through announcements, through hesitation. And if you're thinking, the court stopped it, remember this. They stop actions. They don't erase the delay you already absorbed. If you're still watching, this is the point. Because what looks like a policy fight is really a test of endurance. How much uncertainty will people tolerate before they adapt? And adaptation is the most dangerous outcome of all. What started inside borders didn't stay there. Because when a government treats its own commitments as conditional, markets notice, so do allies. So do competitors. Energy projects don't exist in isolation. They're tied to supply chains, contracts, cross-border investment. When a major infrastructure project can be halted overnight, the risk premium rises. Capital hesitates. Insurance tightens. Timelines stretch. And that hesitation doesn't stay local. International partners begin to price in instability. Long-term agreements feel shorter. Promises feel provisional. At the same time, scientific and regulatory signals weaken weather data. environmental forecasts, research timelines, those aren't domestic conveniences. They're global inputs when funding becomes unpredictable. Collaboration frays. When expertise is punished, silence spreads. This is how a national governance issue becomes a systemic one, not through collapse, through unreliability, and unreliability is contagious. Other governments learn the lesson, they adjust their expectations, they hedge. The system doesn't break loudly. It degrades quietly. And once enough actors behave as if the rules might not hold, the future stops being linear. It starts branching, and none of those branches lead somewhere stable. From here, the system doesn't choose a single direction. It opens into three. The first is adjustment. Institutions adapt. Courts intervene faster. Congress hardens procedures. Agencies build guardrails that anticipate pressure before it arrives. The system survives by learning to brace, not by fixing the underlying incentive, but by absorbing the shocks. The second path is erosion. Nothing dramatic breaks, but delays become normal. Litigation becomes routine. Emergency injunctions replace steady governance. People stop expecting certainty. They plan around instability. The law still exists. It just arrives late. And then there's rupture. That's the path where the timing finally outruns the brakes. Where multiple holds land at once, where courts can't process fast enough, where Congress can't assemble majorities in time, where markets, states, and families make decisions before clarity returns. Rupture doesn't require a declaration. It only requires enough moments where the system can't answer basic questions quickly enough. Will the money arrive? Will the permit stand? Will the rule apply tomorrow? None of these paths announce themselves. They overlap. They borrow from each other. And the dangerous thing is this. All three look manageable at first. The difference only becomes visible later, after habits change, after expectations reset. And by then, the system isn't deciding anymore. It's reacting. There's a temptation at the end of a story like this to feel reassured. Courts blocked it. Congress pushed back. The system held. But that's not the lesson here. The lesson is how close the experiment came to working. How much could be attempted before anyone had to say no? How much friction the system absorbed without collapsing? Because nothing about this danger depends on one administration, or one election, or one moment. It depends on a discovery that's already been made. That power doesn't need to rewrite the law to change outcomes. It just needs to control when the law is felt. Once that's learned, it doesn't unlearn itself. So the question going forward isn't whether this ends, it's whether it returns faster, quieter, more legally fluent, whether the next version looks less like overreach and more like procedure. If you're still here, that matters, because attention is the only thing that slows normalization, the only thing that keeps pressure visible. This story doesn't conclude tonight. It continues in budgets, in court calendars, in delays that never make headlines. And in the next chapter, the mechanism matters more than ever. Stay with me. Because once you know how the system bends, the real danger is not noticing when it bends again.